All right, so this section of notes is going to follow the valves, right? The last slide that I talked about was about the valves of the heart. And so this is going to be specifically to start here about blood vessels that are attached to the heart. So in general, all over the body, arteries transport blood away from the heart and veins transport blood to the heart. But on this section of notes, we're going to specifically talk about those that are associated with the heart itself. So the left atrium is going to receive blood from the left and right pulmonary veins. Pulmo means lungs, as you can see there, okay? The left ventricle is going to send blood to the body via the aorta, right? So those are specific vessels that are associated with the heart itself. And the right atrium is going to receive blood from the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava, and then another structure that's called the coronary sinus, and those are all veins, okay? The right ventricle is going to send blood to the lungs via the pulmonary trunk, which is going to then branch and go to the left and right lungs via the left and right pulmonary arteries, right? The next slide says that extending off the base of the aorta, okay, so here's the base of the aorta right here. So in extending off the base of the aorta, the ascending region of it, there's two small branches that are going to extend around the heart that we can see down here, and they're going to form the left and right coronary arteries, right? These are the vessels that are going to actually supply the heart tissue itself, that myocardium, with oxygen and nutrients for it to carry out daily activities, generate ATP through cellular respiration, and for it to contract and relax. Then we have cardiac veins that are going to also closely parallel those coronary arteries. Can't really see those on the diagram since those are red structures that are all supposed to just be arteries, but just imagine some blue veins paralleling that, and you can kind of see those over here. All right, so I can't remember exactly where I left off on this. I got interrupted. Somebody knocked on the door. I know it was somewhere down here on cardiac veins. They are going to closely parallel the coronary arteries, and you can see them over here on this diagram. They are going to join the coronary sinus. Okay, so as waste products get drained from the myocardium, itself, so carbon dioxide, for example, it's going to enter into those cardiac veins. They're going to join and dump into that coronary sinus that's then going to enter into the right atrium. All right, so then following that, next, the pathway of circulation that we're going to talk about. There's two paths. The heart is said to be a pump, or two side-by-side pumps, as you see there. Each of those is going to serve a different pathway or circuit. So you have the pulmonary circuit, and then you're going to have the systemic circuit. So the pulmonary circuit, this is going to involve the right side of the heart, and it's going to include the vessels that are going to carry blood from the heart to the lungs and then back to the heart from the lungs, right? So if we were going to circulate through the pulmonary circuit, okay, so it says here for step 1, deoxygenated blood is going to enter the left atrium that we see down here. It's going to come into the left atrium through the superior up here, okay, and inferior vena cava. We're actually just seeing both of those there, and in through the coronary sinus. Okay, it's going to enter into the right atrium. The pressure is going to build in the right atrium as it fills with blood, and that's going to force the tricuspid valve to open. Right, then about 70 to 80% of the blood is going to flow down into the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, okay, well, I should say the first thing that has to happen is that then the atrium is going to contract. Okay, the right atrium is, because remember, the majority of the blood's down in there. The right atrium is going to contract, and that's going to pump the remaining blood into the ventricle. Then the atrium is going to relax. Right, once all that blood's in the ventricle, the pressure is going to build in the ventricle, right? And as that pressure builds, that's going to close the tricuspid valve. Here it says the ventricle contracts, forcing the pulmonary valve open. So as the ventricle contracts, it's going to push this valve, the pulmonary valve, open. Blood's going to enter into the pulmonary trunk, and then that's going to split into the left and right pulmonary arteries to go to the left and right lungs. Right, and so that's where gas exchange is going to happen. So you got a nice capillary bed shown here in the lungs, right? And so then blood's going to be returned to the heart via the pulmonary veins, right? So here's the pulmonary veins coming back into the left atrium. All right, so next, once blood has come back from the lungs, okay, it's picked up oxygen, it's dropped off carbon dioxide, it's going to come back into the left atrium again via the pulmonary veins from both the left and the right lung. It says this systemic circuit then is what we're going to talk about next. So it involves the left side of the heart. It's going to include specifically the vessels that carry blood from the heart to the body and then back to the heart. So for step one here, oxygenated blood, again, I just said it's going to enter the left atrium. It's going to go through this bicuspid or mitral valve, and it's going to go down into the left ventricle, right? Then the left ventricle is going to contract. As the left ventricle contracts, that's going to force open the aortic valve, and the blood's going to flow into the aorta, okay, this red vessel behind the blue one there. Then the oxygenated blood is going to travel to the body via arteries. Those are going to then branch into arterioles. Okay, so if we say this is an artery, it's going to branch into smaller vessels called arterioles, and then eventually we're going to get to a capillary bed, okay, where gas exchange is going to take place. And so then, I'm trying to see what I haven't said here. And so then we're going to have oxygen that's going to get dropped off in the tissues of our body, okay, and move by diffusion. And then carbon dioxide is going to get picked up as a waste product in those capillary beds. And it's going to enter, that carbon dioxide rich blood is going to enter into venules. Those venules are going to merge into veins. And then we're going to start back with the pulmonary circuit as blood comes back into the right side of the heart. Okay, next, in general, blood vessels. Okay, we're going to talk about characteristics of arteries versus veins versus capillaries. So arteries, they're really strong, they're very flexible, they're really elastic, they're very thick-walled, and they carry blood that's under high pressure, okay? So they tend to be deeper in the body than a vein will, right, because of that pressure, as far as the pressure that the blood is under. You can see a diagram here, okay, with a really thick wall of tunica media. So blood vessels, or arteries specifically, are going to consist of 3 layers. The tunica interna or tunica intima, that's the innermost layer. It's really elastic because it's got a stretch as blood's moving through it. It's got a smooth surface. It secretes chemicals that are going to prevent blood from clotting. Then you've got your tunica media. Okay, so that's made of smooth muscle. That's what's specifically contracting to propel the blood. And then you have the tunica externa, which is also called the tunica adventitia. This is going to attach the artery to surrounding tissues. So it's as it says there, I know it's kind of tiny, supports and protects the vessels, okay, that we see out here. And then you've got, a membrane covering that. Arteries, again, are going to branch. I mentioned this up on the slide before this. Arteries are going to branch and turn into smaller vessels called arterioles. And then the larger of these arterioles are going to have these same 3 layers. And then those arterioles are going to branch into a capillary bed. But we're going to do veins next. All right, so then veins, they are going to consist of the same 3 layers that an artery consists of, the tunica interna, the tunica media, and the tunica externa. But the tunica media is a lot thinner than it is in veins and has less muscle. And I know there's a question there, but the reason for that is that when we get to the venous return system, the blood's under low pressure. The blood is not going to be pumped the same way it is through an artery. It's also under low pressure. But essentially, these vessels have a thinner layer of muscle because they're not doing quite as much work to get blood to the tissues of the body to drop off oxygen. And so you have a couple of other structures that are going to be present and characteristics that are present in veins. So large veins are going to contain flaps or valves that are going to prevent backward flow of the blood. So they're going to kind of be like the valves in the heart. Okay, so you got a vein shown here, you got a valve here. So in this particular diagram, blood would move from the left to the right because that valve would then kind of kick open, moving to the right. I know that's tiny. Skeletal muscles are going to actually assist with blood flow in the venous return. So essentially we tend to say that the skeletal muscles, as they contract, they kind of milk the blood along its pathway. Kind of think of as your tube squeezing toothpaste out of the toothpaste tube. The blood's under little pressure, so these are going to be closer to the surface of the body, typically in comparison to arteries. Okay, we need to protect the arteries more because of the fact that the blood's under high pressure, so they're typically deeper. And then again, venules are the smaller branches of veins. Okay, and so you can see an artery, arteriole, again, the middle of that's a capillary bed, and then the venules, and then a vein. So then with capillaries, okay, these are your smallest blood vessels. The capillary bed has really high surface area to volume ratios. Okay, in general, they're going to connect arterioles and venules. And so this is where gas exchange is going to take place. So in our lungs, oxygen is going to load into the bloodstream in a capillary bed, and carbon dioxide is going to unload. And we'll talk about that in the respiratory system. And all the other tissues of your body, okay, so in your toes, in your skeletal muscles, in your brain, wherever we're talking about, oxygen's going to unload from the bloodstream and enter those tissues to carry out cellular respiration. And then as a waste product, as we generate carbon dioxide through respiration, it's going to load into the bloodstream from those tissues. And so regardless of where we're talking about a capillary bed, you've got high surface area for quick gas exchange. This is going to be only tunica interna. Okay, so this is going back to simple squamous epithelial tissue. Remember, one of the things we looked at was capillary beds, and really in the lab, had we done a lab, we would have looked at the lining of the alveolar chamber, okay, to see that single layer of simple squamous epithelial tissue. We didn't really look at capillary beds so much via the virtual lab. We just looked at the lining of the alveoli in the respiratory system. As blood cells go through capillary beds, because these are so tiny, they literally move through single file. Okay, each red blood cell just goes through in a line. And then the amount of capillary bed that's located in each different type of tissue varies depending on the oxygen needs of that particular tissue. So it says like muscle and nervous tissue, they have really high concentrations of capillary beds, where like the cornea, there's no capillaries that feed that at all specifically. It's really low because there's just not any. And then cartilage, that's going to have a pretty low concentration as well. So things that need a whole lot of blood flow, right? Nervous tissue and your muscles, lots of capillary beds. Things that don't need as much blood flow in general, low concentrations of capillary beds. And so for cartilage, for example, that's one of the reasons that heals slowly. If you remember that from first semester, is that there's just not a lot of a blood supply to assist with healing. And that's cartilage just as a reminder, neurons as a reminder, and then your types of muscle tissue listed there. If you have any questions about this, let me know. And never mind, I forgot about this picture. I was just going to show you real quickly. Okay, so there's an artery in a section view of an artery with a really thick layer of muscle. Okay, you can see the high surface area in the capillary bed again. Again, in general, arteries are going to be shown in red because they're carrying oxygenated blood for the most part. Veins are typically shown in blue because for the most part they are carrying deoxygenated blood. Thin layer of muscle tissue there, a little valve, right, so that blood goes in one direction like it would be coming out of that vessel, okay, as far as the way it's structured on the slide. All right, so I paused for a second because I just realized I'm not sure if I said that in general, arteries, we said that they are going to carry blood away from the heart. I know that I said that, okay? As they carry blood away from the heart, typically they are carrying oxygenated blood, so you need to probably write this down. The exception to that is that the pulmonary trunk, and then therefore when that branches to the pulmonary arteries, that those are arteries that are carrying deoxygenated blood. They're carrying that deoxygenated blood to the lungs to drop off carbon dioxide. Okay, and so then your exception to what veins carry, so they are typically going to carry blood that's deoxygenated in nature and return that blood toward the heart. The exception is the pulmonary veins. So after blood picks up oxygen in the lungs, it's going to return to the left atrium via the left and right pulmonary veins, and they are going to be carrying oxygen into the left side of the heart so that then the left ventricle can contract, it's going to go into the left atrium, then down into the left ventricle, that'll contract and pump blood out the aorta to deliver oxygen to the tissues of the body. Okay, and I just realized I had to pause because I thought for a second, maybe I didn't say that, okay? So then I was going to just mention this. We don't do a whole lot with this, but in this, I know you can't read hardly anything that's on here, but I just figured I'd mention that a lot of our blood vessels, not all of them, but a lot of them are named for regional body terms that we've already covered, or what organ they either supply or drain, okay? So for example, the femoral artery, okay, it's going to run down the length of the femur. The radial artery is going to run along the length of the radius. The popliteal vein, remember popliteal is on the back of the knee. Okay, so it's on the posterior side of the knee. The abdominal aorta runs through the abdominal region. And so this is something that, again, we don't spend a lot of time on, but just something to point out, especially as we get into other units where we are talking about blood supply. Like, for example, when we're talking about the kidneys, we're going to talk about the renal arteries and the renal veins, delivering oxygenated blood to the kidney and then carrying deoxygenated blood with other waste products away from the kidney. So now, if you have any questions about this section, let me know.